Welcome back to Plato's Republic. Doing Book 9 today. If you're just joining us, check the description. I'll have a link for the full playlist. Everybody else, you are in for probably what's going to be a short video. Book 9 is one of the shorter books of the Republic. I flipped through it. It looks like he talks about one thing for the first 40% and then something else for the second 60%. So I might just do that first 40% and call it a day. So we'll see what happens. It just depends on how I'm feeling as we go through it. So, Book 8, what did we talk about? We talked about the 5 different types of constitutions. So we had the aristocracy, or this ideal state. Then we talked about how that devolves into a timocracy. Basically, they screw up some fertility calculations, and then you get some irons mixing with some golds, and then the wrong people are in charge. And then they start to just neglect education and love only honors. And they become a timocracy that way because you get kind of the wrong people as your soldiers. And then that goes on for a while until the guys in charge decide that they like spending money on the side and start to allow people to accumulate money, and then the rich people take control of the city. So then it becomes an oligarchy. And when the rich people are in control, they just make everybody else poor. They have a lot of like payday loans and I guess student debt that makes it so there's only the super wealthy in the city and the super poor, the super penurious, if you will. And the poor people are divided into beggars and like temple thieves and pickpockets. And it's basically just not a good scene, but then they get together and realize that they can just like band together and overthrow the rich people and establish democracy. And so that's what they do. And everybody gets the vote, everybody gets a say, and people can kind of do whatever they want. There's not a whole lot of law and order around there. My favorite was, in addition to not being required to go to war or not required to go on a jury, you could also go to war if you felt like it, or serve on a jury if you felt like it, even if the rules said that you could not. I was thinking about this a little bit more, and it reminds me so much of this, like the Old West. In the United States, you just had people deciding to go to war with like the Indians, or in Central America, they would just decide that they wanted to go overthrow a government without the United States' permission. They just like, yeah, let's just go invade and see what happens. Even Teddy Roosevelt was kind of doing that in Cuba. He just felt like taking some guys down to Cuba and charging up San Juan Hill, and he did. So maybe that's the ultimate democracy, was late 19th century America. I don't really know. But, on the other hand, his version of democracy, men and women were treated equally, which, of course, was not the case in late 19th century America. And what else do we have happen there? The democracy ultimately collapses because people start getting mad about the money makers, because you got all these idle and extravagant people who are doing all, like, kind of having fun lives. And then they get a little bit mad about these guys making money. They're like, give us some of that money, or give us some of that honey. And then the rich people just say, hey, you guys are trying to take my money. I'm going to actually take measures to protect it. So I'm going to behave more like an oligarch. And then that makes the less rich people even more mad. They're like, oh, we got these oligarchs who are hiring people to protect them, like hiring, I don't know, private investigators or like Pinkertons. To protect their stuff. This isn't right. So they find a popular leader, and then the popular leader intimates that he's going to redistribute the land and relieve everyone's debts. And he gets put in power, and then to stay in power, he has to start some foreign wars. So he just starts some wars, and then people around him start questioning what he's doing. They're like, dude, I thought you were going to bring power to the people, and now you're just starting wars everywhere. And he just has all those people killed. So he does his little Stalinist Pol Pot purge, and then basically no smart people are left around him, and he's all alone in his big palace, feeling sorry for himself. And then eventually, either he kind of runs out of money, and then he actually has to start taxing people some more, and then they get mad about it, and they either run him out of the city, or maybe he fights to stay in power, or just rules as a tyrant, lives out his days as a tyrant. And so that's kind of our historiography of societies, going from the aristocracy down to the tyranny. We had his parallel story. of the aristocratic man, the just man who, I guess, in whom reason and spiritedness cooperate to keep the appetites under control. He's got a son whose mother keeps telling him, like, oh yeah, your father's just a pushover around town. You need to, if he were a real man, he'd be making more money and suing people more often and running for office. So the son's like, yeah, I'm going to run for office and be loved by the city. And so he does, and then he grows up, and he has a son, and then what happens to the father here is, I guess he doesn't play his cards right. He loves honor too much, and then eventually gets exiled or killed or loses all his money. And then his son grows up in poverty as a result, and then just says, I don't want to grow up I don't want to be in poverty. I'm just going to focus on making money my whole life. So he is the equivalent of the oligarch and has this oligarchic constitution that just cares about making money and not spending money. So he doesn't do anything that might require him to spend money, including becoming a successful rap star or athlete or celebrity of any kind, because he feels like he might be tempted by luxurious living and lose all his money. So he has a kid who becomes the Democrat, the Democratic man, and so this kid grows up and he's looking at his dad. He's like, "Yeah, Dad just made any money, but didn't spend it. So I'm going to spend money and enjoy life a little bit and party." And that's what he does. So he gets kind of indulges in the vices more than his father, and then lives a more interesting life. And it's kind of the life of the party wherever he goes. Ultimately, becomes somebody he reins in his appetite somewhat by the end of his life, whereas he gets older and sort of has a mix of just doing things responsibly when he feels like it, but then partying when he feels like it. And Plato says that's sort of the nature, or Socrates says that's sort of the nature of the democratic guy. And then I think we kind of left things there. So the last piece of the puzzle is the democratic man's son, and I guess he's going to grow up to be a tyrant somehow, and that's what we have to look forward to here in Book 9. And then after that, I think I'll start talking about some other stuff, and I don't know, maybe I'll do 2 in 1 or 1 in 1, or we'll see what I'm feeling like as we get through it. So here we go, starting Book 9, Plato's Republic. Socrates' narration continues. Socrates. The tyrannical man himself remains to be investigated. How he evolves from a democratic one, what he is like once he has come to exist, and whether the way he lives is wretched or blessedly happy. Edemontus. Yes, he still remains. Socrates. Do you know what else I still miss? Edemontus. What? I do not think we have adequately distinguished the nature and number of our appetites. And if that subject is not adequately dealt with, our investigation will lack clarity. Edemontus. Well, is it now as fine a time as any? It certainly is, says Socrates. So, consider what I want to look at in them. It is this. Among unnecessary pleasures and appetites, there are some that seem to me to be lawless. We talked a little bit about those, you got an appetite for bread and relishes, and then you have an appetite for pastries and other things that you don't really need. These are probably present in all of us, but they are held in check by the laws and by our better appetites allied with reason. There's that definition of justice again. In a few people, they have been eliminated entirely, or only a few weak ones remain, while in others they are stronger and more numerous. Which ones do you mean? So I guess, which people have these strong and numerous unnecessary appetites? The ones that wake up when we are asleep, whenever the rest of the soul, the rational, gentle, and ruling element, slumbers. Ooh, I love dreams and sleep, because it's just this deep psychology that people like to pretend is not there. Then the bestial and savage part, full of food or drink, comes alive, casts off sleep, and seeks to go and gratify its own characteristic instincts. Whoa. It sounds like, if you have any friends who take Ambien before they go to bed, look up the Ambien walrus. I think this is related. It's like this other creature comes alive in the middle of the night and starts tweeting and calling ex-girlfriends and raiding the refrigerator. You know it will dare to do anything in such a state, released and freed from all shame and wisdom. In fantasy, it does not shrink from trying to have sex with a mother or with anyone else, man, god, or beast. Whoa. It will commit any foul murder, and there is no food it refuses to eat. In a word, it does not refrain from anything, no matter how foolish or shameful. Look up Ambien Walrus. Edemontis. That's probably true. Socrates. On the other hand, I suppose someone who keeps himself healthy and temperate will awaken his rational element before going to sleep and feast it on fine arguments and investigations, which he has brought to an agreed conclusion within himself. As for the appetitive element, he neither starves nor overfeeds it, so it will slumber and not disturb the best element with its pleasure or pain, but will leave it alone, just by itself and pure, to investigate and reach out for the perception of something, whether past, present, or future, that it does not know. Okay, so I think... Alright, I'm going to go back here. So when we're asleep, if someone... I think this is if someone has all these unnecessary appetites. Yeah, okay. If someone has all these, like, appetites in them, then when they dream, they just have all these, like, Freudian dreams, which is kind of pure id, with no shame, trying to eat a lot and have a lot of sex, and, yeah, it's just kind of this pure beast emotion coming out. And then he says the rational man who has his appetites in check during the day also, it looks like his appetite just stays asleep while he's asleep, so he's just like, it's almost like he's thinking about math problems. It says investigate and reach out for the perception of something that it does not know. So it's just like the mind is going to work at night in this person. Okay, he soothes the spirited element in a similar way, and does not get angry and fall asleep with his spirit still aroused. And, when he has calmed these two elements and stimulated the third, in which wisdom resides, he takes his rest. You know, this is the state in which he most readily grasps the truth, and in which the visions appearing in his dreams are least lawless. Isn't that interesting? This guy best grasps the truth at night in his dreams. I love that. Edemontis, I completely agree. Socrates. Well, we have been led a bit astray and said a bit too much. I love his digressions, because it's just like whatever's really on his mind. What we want to pay attention to is this. There are appetites of a terrible, savage, and lawless kind in everyone, even in those of us who seem to be entirely moderate. This surely becomes clear in sleep. Paging Dr. Freud. Do you think I am talking sense? Do you agree with me? I love this, because we often think about, like, other societies as being more savage or cruel or terrible. Like, pick some time period in history, you find some society, you're like, oh, they did all these terrible things. We shouldn't support that. Like, we're the good people. It's like, well, do you think human nature is universal or not? If you think it's universal, then it's like, if you were in that society, you'd probably be doing all those terrible things too. Or at least your best friends would be doing all those terrible things. But you're not in that society, so you can kind of praise yourself for like, oh, I'd never do anything like that. It's like, really? All these people, if they lived in your society, they'd probably be saying the same things, and they would like be going to college and, you know, just driving to work every day and just seeming to be moderate. But you put them in a more extreme circumstance where there's like less wealth, then maybe they start to do like more terrible things, and it's really hard to pass judgment or just like pretend like you wouldn't be doing the exact same thing if you were in one of those societies or historical circumstances. So I love this idea of this all this savage nature in mankind just like being pervasive and beneath the surface in all societies, even though we like to pretend that we're all like moderate and normal. Alright, Socrates. No, sorry, Edemontis. Yes, I do agree. Socrates. Now, recall what we said the democratic man is like. He was the result, we presumed, of a childhood upbringing by a thrifty father who honored only appetites that made money and despised the unnecessary ones whose objects are amusement and showing off. Isn't that right? Adimantus. Yes. Okay, now we're finally getting to the great grandson, something, maybe great great grandson at this point. Okay, and by associating with more sophisticated men who are full of the appetites we just described, he starts to indulge in every kind of arrogance and adopt their kind of behavior, because of his hatred of his father's thrift. But, since he has a better nature than his corruptors, he is pulled in both directions and settles in the middle between their two ways of life. You remember this. It's like, oh, do I go with Dad? Do I go with my cool friends? And enjoying each in what he takes to be moderation, he lives a life that is neither illiberal nor lawless, transformed now from an oligarch to a democrat. Yes, says Adimantus, that was and still is our belief about someone like that. Suppose then, says Socrates, that this man has now in turn become older and has a son who is also brought up in his father's way of life. I will. Suppose, too, that the same things happen to him as happened to his father. He is led into all kinds of lawlessness that those leading him call total freedom. His father and the rest of his family come to the aid of the appetites that are in the middle, while the others help the opposite ones. And when these terrible enchanters and tyrant makers have no hope of keeping hold of the young man in any other way, they contrive to implant a powerful passion in him as the popular leader of those idle and profligate appetites, a sort of great winged drone. Or do you think passion is ever anything else in such people? Adimantus, I certainly do not think it is. Okay, so I think he's saying it's like the cool dad is like, oh, hey kids, like, we're going out for the night. There might be some beers in the fridge. I won't be counting them when I come back. And then, so those are kind of the appetites in the middle, like, yeah, here's like a little bit of freedom, kind of some moderate freedom, not being too crazy. And then the others, I guess, maybe are more extreme. And they're like, hey, yeah, you're a cool dad. Like, we're just bringing some heroin over. And yeah, so you got I think those are the terrible enchanters and tyrant makers. And they contrive to implant a powerful passion in him. So I think it's like you got his dad's trying to be cool, and then his friends are like getting a little over the line and dangerous, and then trying to like turn this poor kid into the leader of the idle and profligate appetites. Okay, so it's kind of weird, but I'm enjoying it. I was also just thinking, like, I think this scenario, okay, at least the last few, so we had the oligarch, who is the moneymaker, who begat the democrat, who begets the tyrant. So at least for the previous two, the oligarch, I think, is like my grandparents' generation who grew up in the Depression. Like, they grew up dirt poor. Like, my grandfather grew up in, like, Alabama in the 30s, which is just not a wealthy place to be. And he just, like, saved his money. I think he and the rest of his generation just saved money. They're just like, I don't want to be without money. I'm not going to spend money. I'm just going to make money. And that's just what I'm going to do. And I'm not just going to kind of keep my nose down, not do anything kind of luxurious. And then the baby boom, those are like the Democrat man who looks at Dad, who's like, Dad, why are you just making all this money? You're never spending it. You're never having fun. I'm going to go have some fun. So they're, smoking dope, going to Woodstock, drugs, sex, rock and roll, and having a good time. And then they kind of pull back, because that's what happens with the Democratic man, is he, like, parties a lot when he's young, and then he, like, pulls back. He's like, okay, I got to be a little bit responsible now, like, go to the gym sometime. So that's like baby boomers having kids. They're like, oh, man, okay, I had a lot of fun. I'll still sometimes have fun, but I'll try to be responsible, but maybe I'll still be a little irresponsible. I'm just not going to worry about it too much. And so then I guess I'm the tyrant generation, maybe. Although my parents weren't leaving beers in the fridge when I was a teenager, so maybe I dodged the bullet. Okay, let's see where he goes. Socrates. And when the other appetites come buzzing around, filled with incense, perfumes, wreaths, wine, and all the other pleasures found in such company, they feed the drone, make it grow as large as possible, and plant the sting of longing in it. Then this popular leader of the soul adopts madness as its bodyguard and is stung to frenzy. What is going on here? Okay, so they got lots of appetites, feeding it like, yes, yeah, cool guy with cool dad. Let's just do even crazier and crazier stuff. Your parents are gone for the weekend. If it finds any beliefs or appetites in the man that are regarded as good or are still moved by shame, it destroys them and throws them out until it has purged him of temperance and filled him with imported madness. Okay, so this is like the kid who just goes crazy partying. Just like a completely degenerate teenager. Adeimantus, you have perfectly described how a tyrannical man comes to exist. Socrates, is that then why passion has long been called a tyrant? Probably so. And hasn't a drunken man, my friend, something of a tyrannical cast of mind, too? He has. Ah, okay. So, you're just throwing all reason out. If you're full of passion, I'm not sure what passion in Greek is, or what they're talking about exactly, like passion with a capital P. Socrates. And, of course, someone who is mad and deranged attempts to rule not only human beings, but gods as well, and expects to be able to rule them. Of course. A man becomes tyrannical in the precise sense, then, you marvelous fellow, when his nature and his practices are both together, lead him to drunkenness, passion, and melancholia. Okay, so it's like your appetites are ruling in the tyrannical man. Whereas where we started, it was the appetites are kept under control. Here they're like, yeah, I don't need reason. I just do whatever I want. I don't need you. Don't question me. Absolutely. So that, it seems, is how a tyrannical man comes to exist. Now, what is his life like? Adeimantus, why don't you tell me, as askers of riddles usually do? Socrates, I will tell you. You see, I think someone in whom the tyrant of passion dwells, and in whom it serves as the captain of everything in the soul, next goes in for festivals, revelries, luxuries, girlfriends, and all that sort of thing. Inevitably. And don't lots of terrible appetites sprout up each day and night beside it, creating needs for all sorts of things? Okay, yeah, he's just partying all the time, even more than his boomer dad. Indeed they do. So any income someone like that has is soon spent. Of course, this is just what happened in the state, in the tyranny too. He's like, you got to raid the treasury, and then the treasury runs out, and then you go to your dad, which in that case was the people, and then the people get all mad. So I think the same thing's going to happen here, is he's going to come crawling back to Pops. Okay, of course, says Adeimantus. And the next thing, surely, is borrowing and expenditure of capital. What else? And when everything's gone, won't the violent crowd of appetites that have nested within him inevitably shout in protest? Like, oh no, I ran out of my drug money. And when people of this sort are driven by the stings of these other appetites, but particularly of passion itself, which leads all the others as if they were its bodyguards, stung to frenzy, don't they look to see who possesses anything that can be taken from him by deceit or force? Okay, this is when he becomes like the dangerous alcoholic, I think. That's just like, uses manipulation to get what he wants. Certainly. He must take it from every source then, or live in great suffering or pain. Yeah, this is where he becomes an addict. Okay, the tyrant is the addict. Adeimantus, he must. So much wisdom in this book. And just as the late coming pleasures within him do better than the older ones and steal away their satisfactions, won't he himself, young as he is, think he deserves to do better than his father and mother? I'm going to look up this note on doing better, because that was like a big theme in, I think it's just going to say C Glossary of Terms. But yeah, C Glossary of Terms. But it's a big theme in, oh man, was that book 2? Where he's like, I was some earlier definition of justice. Where it's like, yeah, everybody just, at the end of the day, they still want to do better than other people. And that, like, leads them into injustice. I forgot the exact argument, but it's way, way back there. Doing better is, like, an important part of the argument. Okay. So he thinks he deserves to do better than his father and mother. Yeah. You had fun, Dad. I'm going to have even more fun. Or maybe make more money. I'm not sure. And if he has spent his own share, won't he try to take some of his father's wealth by converting it to his own use? Yeah, stealing from Pops. taking the inheritance and squandering it. Of course. And if his parents resist him, won't he first try to steal it and deceive them? Total degenerate addict kid. Should be ashamed of yourselves, parents. Look what you raised. Adeimantus, certainly. And if he cannot, won't he next try to seize it by force? I suppose so. And if, you amazing man, the old man and woman stand their ground and put up a fight, would he take care and be reluctant to act like a tyrant? Adeimantus, I am not very optimistic about the parents of someone like that. Socrates. But in the name of Zeus, Adeimantus, do you really think that for the sake of his latest love and unnecessary girlfriend, he would strike his mother, who is his oldest and necessary friend? Or that, for the sake of his latest and unnecessary boyfriend, who is in the bloom of youth, he would strike his aged and necessary father, the oldest of his friends, who is no longer in the bloom of youth? Or that he would enslave his parents to them if he brought them into the same house? Yes, by Zeus, he would. Okay, he's rebelling against his parents, maybe even killing them almost, at least enslaving them. This is what addiction does, folks. They knew it a long time ago. It seems to be a great blessing to produce a tyrannical son. You darn sarcastic Socrates. It certainly does. Socrates. What happens to someone like that when the possessions of his father and mother give out and the swarm of pleasures now inside him has grown dense? Won't he first try to break into someone's house or snatch the cloak of someone walking late at night? Okay, now he's roaming the streets. Next, won't he try to clean out some temple? And in the course of all that, his old childhood beliefs about fine or shameful things, beliefs that are accounted just, are mastered by the new ones that have been released from slavery and, as the bodyguard of passion, hold sway along with it. Okay. And mastered by the new ones... What? Okay, his old childhood beliefs about shameful things are mastered by the new ones, the new beliefs that have been released from slavery, and as the bodyguard of passion... I don't know what he's talking about yet. These are the ones that used to be freed and sleep as a dream, when he himself, since he was still subject to the laws and his father, had oh, now he's going completely bonkers. So all these, like, dream desires are coming out. Oh boy, watch out. He's in a downward spiral now. He's like Joaquin Phoenix, and I'm still here. Okay. When he was still subject to the laws of his father, had a democratic constitution within him. But, under the tyranny of passion, what he used to become occasionally in his dreams, he has now become permanently while awake. So there's no terrible murder, no food, and no act from which he will refrain. On the contrary, passion lives like a tyrant within him, in complete anarchy and lawlessness, as a sole ruler, and drives him, as if he were a city, to dare anything that will provide sustenance for itself and the unruly mob around it, some of which have come in from the outside as a result of his bad associates, while others have come from within, freed and let loose by his own bad habits. Okay, maybe this is more like American Psycho. Isn't this the life such a man leads? Okay, wow. He just becomes like a murderer. And, yeah, just does whatever he wants. Just completely loses his mind. This is crazy. Adeimantus, it is. And if there are only a few men like that in the city, and the majority of the others are temperate, they immigrate in order to become the bodyguard of some other tyrant or serve as paid auxiliaries if there happens to be a war somewhere. Okay, what is this? They want to become the bodyguard. So is he talking about the associates? I think he's talking about the associates, because at least with the tyranny, too, we had, like, the bodyguard became very important. But if they chance to live in a time of peace and calm, they stay right there in the city and cause lots of little evils. So I don't know if he's talking about the tyrannical personalities that are going to become the bodyguard of another tyrant. I think so, because it's like, this guy just loves doing whatever he wants, so he really likes war. You can just go, plunder and loot, pillage, and... yeah, I think he's just like, I got bad blood. I want to go somewhere where I can do whatever I want when I want. Okay. Alright, if they stay right there in the city and cause lots of little evils. What sort of evils do you mean? They steal, break into houses, snatch purses, steal clothes, rob temples, and kidnap people. Okay, these are just, like, psychopathic criminals. And yeah, either they join the army because there's a war going on, or they stick around and cause trouble. Sometimes, if they are capable speakers, they become sycophants and bear false witness and accept bribes. You mean they are small evils, provided there are only a few such people? Yes. After all, small evils are small by comparison to great ones. And when it comes to producing corruption and misery in a city, all these evils together do not, as the saying goes, come within a mile of a tyrant. But when you get a great number of these people, and their followers in the city, and they become aware of their numbers, they are the ones who, together with the foolishness of the people, create the tyrant out of one of them among them, who has in his soul the greatest and strongest tyrant of all. Okay, so yeah, you get a lot of tyrannical personalities, and they make a real tyrant. They're like, okay, like, we all love killing and doing all this stuff. Let's just get together, form a club, appoint the baddest guy as our leader, and then we'll just, like, follow him around, like, whatever he wants to do. Naturally, says Adeimantus, since he would be the most tyrannical. Socrates, that's if they submit willingly. But if the city doesn't put itself in his hands, then just as he has once chastised his mother and father, he will now punish his fatherland in the same way, if he can, bringing in new friends and making and keeping his once beloved motherland, as the Cretans call it, or fatherland, their slaves. And that is surely the end at which the appetites of a man like that aim. Okay. So, yeah, he's taken over the city, I guess, with his new friends. It most certainly is. So this, finally, I think we have, like, the man and the Constitution merging. Because before it was like these parallel tracks, and now I think it's like the tyrannical man becomes the tyrant. So because before he's talking about the tyrannical Constitution, he's like, yeah, a popular leader will emerge. And now he's like, yeah, and that's the tyrannical man whose appetites rule, because he learns to be a good speaker and a sycophant, and this is how he takes charge. But I don't know if he actually would be a popular leader, if he's just like a killer and temple robber. Alright, Adeimantus it most certainly is. Socrates, so, isn't this what such men are like in private life before they start to rule? Okay, yeah, this is the tyrannical man becomes the literal tyrant of the city. In the first place, don't they associate with flatterers who are ready to do anything to serve them? Or, if they need something from someone else, won't they grovel and willingly engage in any sort of posturing the way slaves do? But once they get what they need, isn't it a different story altogether? Yes, completely different. Oh, man. Yeah, this is like, if you ever read accounts of like how Lyndon Johnson got things from people, he would just like beg and grovel and just do, use force, use like sympathy, like whatever it took. And then you'd agree, and he'd just like completely change. So, those with a tyrannical nature live their entire lives without ever being friends with anyone, always masters to one man or slaves to another, but never getting a taste of freedom or true friendship. I also think Lyndon Johnson was a lonely person. Adeimantus, exactly. Wouldn't we be right to call people like that untrustworthy? Of course. And as unjust as anyone can be, assuming we were right, in our earlier conclusions about what justice is like. And we certainly were right. Let's sum up the worst type of man, then. He is surely the one who, when awake, is like the dreaming person we described earlier. Yeah, alright, yeah, he's like this nightmare man come to life. Freddy Krueger. Exactly. And he evolves from someone who, since he is by nature most tyrannical, achieves sole rule. And the longer he lives as tyrant, the more like that he becomes. Inevitably, said Glaucon, taking over the argument. It's weird. Socrates. Well then, won't the one who is plainly worst also be plainly most wretched? And the one for the longest time is most a tyrant, won't he also be most wretched for the longest time, if truth be told? Though the views of the masses on the subject are naturally also many. Okay, so now he's trying to decide whether this guy's going to be happy or not. And he's saying, no way. All that, at any rate, must be true. Doesn't a tyrannical man correspond to and most resemble a city ruled by a tyrant, a democratic man, a democratically ruled city, and similarly with the others? Glaucon, of course. Okay, so yeah, it's Glaucon taking over for Adeimantus. Got it. Yeah. Rosencrantz taking over for Guildenstern. And the comparison between city and city, as regards their virtue and happiness, isn't it the same as the comparison between man and man? Glaucon, certainly. As regards virtue, then, how does a city ruled by a tyrant compare to a city of the sort we described first that is ruled by a king? Okay, so we finally have all 5 constitutions in both city and man form, and now we're comparing them. Okay, Glaucon says they are absolute opposites. One is the best, the other's the worst. Socrates, I won't ask you which is which, since it is obvious. But as regards happiness and wretchedness, is your judgment the same or different? And let's not become dazzled by looking at the tyrant, since he is just one man, or at the few who surround him. Instead, as is necessary, let's go in and study the city as a whole, and, when we have gone down and looked into every corner, only then present what we believe. Okay, so now we're going to study these cities in detail. So we spent like several books making the ideal city and studying it and looking for justice, and now we're looking for happiness or wretchedness in the other 4. That's a good suggestion, and it is clear to everyone that there is no city more wretched than a tyrannical one, and none happier than one ruled by a king. Socrates, would it also be right, then, to suggest the same thing about the men, that the only fit judge of them is someone who can, in thought, go down into a man's character and discern it, not someone who sees it from the outside, the way a child does, and is dazzled by the facade that tyrants adopt for the outside world, but someone who discerns it adequately? Isn't that the trick here? Really delve down into this character. I think it's a skill not many people have, but you really need just to understand anything about the world. And what if I were to assume that the person we must all listen to is the one who has this capacity to judge, who has lived in the same house as the tyrant and witnessed his behavior at home, and who has seen how he deals with each member of his household when he can be best observed stripped of his tragic costume, and who has seen how he deals with public dangers? Shouldn't we ask the one person who has seen all that to tell us how the tyrant compares to the others with respect to happiness and wretchedness? Is this like the tyrant's wife? Glaucon, that's also a very good suggestion. Then, in order to have someone to answer our questions, do you want us to pretend that we are among the ones who can make such a judgment and that we have met tyrannical people already? I certainly do. Okay, so we'll pretend like we have met a tyrannical person at home. Socrates, come on then, and examine the matter like this for me. Bearing in mind the resemblance between the city and the man, examine each in turn and describe its condition. What kinds of things do you want me to describe? Describe the city first. Would you say that a tyrannical city is free or enslaved? Glaucon, as enslaved as it is possible to be. Yet you can surely see masters and free people in it. Glaucon, yeah, the tyrant's free. Sort of. I can certainly see a small group of people like that, but pretty much the whole population, and the best part of it, is shamefully and wretchedly enslaved. Socrates, if a man and a city are similar, then, mustn't the same structure exist in him too? Oh, so he's a slave to his appetites. Mustn't his soul be full of slavery and illiberality, with those same parts of it enslaved, while a small part, the most wicked and most insane, is master? Glaucon, it must. Will you describe such a soul as enslaved, then, or as free? Glaucon, enslaved, of course. And to go back, isn't the enslaved tyrannical city least able to do what it wishes? By far the least. So, a tyrannical soul will also least do what it wishes. I am talking about the soul as a whole, and will be full of disorder and regret, since it is always forcibly driven by a gadfly. Glaucon, of course. Rich or poor? Which must a tyrannical city be? Glaucon, poor. Socrates, so, a tyrannical soul too must always be poor and insatiable. Glaucon, it must. Socrates, what about fear? Mustn't a city of this sort, and a man of this sort, be filled with it? Glaucon, they certainly must. And do you think you will find more wailing, groaning, lamenting, or painful suffering in any other city? No. What about in a man? Asks Socrates. Do you think such things are more common in anyone than in this tyrannical man maddened by his appetites and passions? How could I? I imagine it is in view of all these things, then, as well as others like them, that you judge this city to be the most wretched of cities. Glaucon, and wasn't I right? Yes, of course, says Socrates, but again, How do you describe the tyrannical man in view of these same things? Okay, so the tyrannical city, definitely the most wretched, living in fear, ruled by appetites. Let's go to the man. Is the tyrannical man also the most wretched man in the world? Glaucon says he is by far the most wretched of them all. Socrates, there your description is no longer right. Oh, looks like Socrates has a trick up his sleeve. What is this, book 1? Glaucon, how so? This man, I think, is not yet the most wretched. Then who is? Presumably, you will regard this next one as even more wretched. Who could be more wretched than a tyrannical man? Which one, says Glaucon? The tyrannical man, says Socrates, who does not live out his life as a private individual, but is unlucky in that some misfortune gives him the opportunity of becoming an actual tyrant. Oh, okay. So that is truly the most wretched man, is the tyrannical man, where it's like when those two parallel paths converge, that guy at the bottom is the most miserable wretch ever born. Glaucon, on the basis of what we have already said, I infer that what you are saying is true. Socrates, yes, but it is not good enough to believe these claims. One must carefully examine someone like that by means of argument. After all, the investigation concerns the greatest thing, a good life and a bad one. I'm going to look at the note on here. No, see something or other. Okay. What is the good life? I guess that's what we've been trying to address this whole time, under the guise of seeking after justice. Glaucon, that's absolutely right. Socrates, so consider then whether there is anything in what I say. You see, I think we should investigate him on the basis of the following. What? On the basis of each and every one of the wealthy private citizens in our cities who own many slaves. How else? For they resemble a tyrant in ruling over many. Although the number ruled by the tyrant is different. Okay, so he's like, how happy is a slave owner? Because the tyrant is basically a slave owner of a city. Glaucon, it is different. Socrates, you know then that these people feel secure and do not fear their slaves. Glaucon, of what have they to be afraid after all? Yeah, I'm just a slave owner. Minding my own business. Socrates, nothing. But do you know why? Glaucon, yes. Because the whole city is ready to defend each of its private citizens. Socrates, that's right. But now, suppose some god were to lift one of these men who has 50 or more slaves out of the city and put him down, with his wife, his children, his slaves, and his other property, in a deserted place, where no free men could come to his assistance. Uh-oh. Can you imagine the sort and amount of fear he would feel that he and his wife and children would be killed by his slaves? It would be huge if you ask me. Socrates, wouldn't he at that point be compelled to start fawning on some of his slaves, promising them all sorts of things and setting them free, even though there was nothing he wanted to do less? And wouldn't he turn out to be a flatterer of slaves? It's like, whoa, hey guys, we're all on the same team here on this desert island. Let's focus on building a fire for tonight. Man, you're looking great today. Glaucon, he would have to be. Otherwise, he'd be killed. Socrates, now, suppose the god were to settle many other neighbors around him who would not tolerate anyone claiming to be master of another, but if they caught such a person, would inflict the most extreme punishments on him. Okay, desert island with a bunch of slaves and then a bunch of free people, maybe democratic type of people. Glaucon, I suppose he would be in even worse trouble, since he would be surrounded by nothing but enemies. Uh-oh. Socrates, so isn't this, then, the kind of prison in which the tyrant is held, the one whose nature we have described filled with multifarious fears and passions? Though his soul is really greedy, he is the only one in the city who cannot go abroad or look at the sights at which other free people yearn to look. Instead, he is mostly stuck in house, living like a woman, envying any other citizen who goes abroad and sees some good thing. Why is he living like a woman exactly? See note. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So this is I guess this is the tyrant of the city. It's like he can't leave the city for a minute because everybody will revolt. Yeah, didn't think about that. Didn't think about your vacation policy, did you, tyrant? Glaucon, absolutely. Yeah, did you ever see Fidel Castro go on a vacation somewhere? Socrates. Isn't such a harvest of evils, then, a measure of the difference between a tyrannical man who is badly governed politically on the inside, whom you judged just now to be most wretched, and one who does not live out his life as a private individual, but is compelled by some chance to become an actual tyrant and try to rule others, when he cannot even master himself? It is as if someone with a body that is sick and cannot master itself were compelled not to spend his life in private pursuits, but to compete and fight with other bodies. Okay, so this is the one. It is right. Okay, he's badly governed politically on the inside, because he's a tyrannical character. Yeah. And he's a real tyrant. That's exactly what he's like. Your description is absolutely true, Socrates. And so, my dear Glaucon, isn't his condition completely wretched? And isn't the life of a tyrant even harsher than the one you judge to be harshest? It certainly is. Look at where we got with that argument. See? It's the dialectic that brings us to truth. So, in truth, then, says Socrates, and whatever some people may think, a real tyrant is really a slave to the worst sorts of fawning and slavery, and a flatterer of the worst kind of people. He is so far from satisfying his appetites in any way that he is in the greatest need of most things and truly poor, as is apparent if one knows how to look at a whole soul. He is full of fear throughout his life and overflowing with convulsions and pains, if in fact his condition is like that of the city he rules. And it is like it, isn't it? Yes, of course. And in addition, shouldn't we also attribute to the man the qualities we mentioned earlier? We said he is inevitably envious, untrustworthy, unjust, friendless, impious, and a host and nurse to every kind of vice. That ruling makes him even more so than before, and that, as a consequence, he is extremely unfortunate, and goes on to make those near him so. Glaucon. No one with any sense could possibly contradict that. Come on, then, and tell me now at last, like the judge who makes the final decision, who you believe is first happiness, and who is second, first in happiness, and who's second, and judge the other similarly, making five altogether, kingly, timocratic, oligarchic, democratic, tyrannical. But Glaucon, that's an easy judgment. You see, I rank them in order of their appearance, just as if they were choruses, both in virtue and vice, and in happiness and its opposite. Okay, so kingly is the most virtuous and happiest, tyrannical the most wretched and vice-ridden. Socrates, shall we then hire a herald, or shall I myself announce that the son of Ariston has given as his verdict that the best and most just is the most happy, and that he is the one who is most kingly and rules like a king over himself, whereas the worst and most unjust is the most wretched, and he, again, is the one who, because he is most tyrannical, is the greatest tyrant over himself and his city. Oh, back to book one. He just brought it full circle. The son of Ariston, that's Glaucon. Also Adeimantus is Glaucon's brother, and also Plato is both of their brothers. But there he is, because that was what we've been trying to get at this whole time, from book 2, when Glaucon comes in, and he says, hey, the unjust man, who people think is just, he's the happiest of all, because he gets all the benefits of injustice and all the benefits of justice. So he gets, people think he's a great guy, but really he does whatever he wants. And that's the happiest person in the world. And now Socrates is just saying, no, we already proved what justice is. Justice is as is defined in this ideal city. And that soul, that individual, is the most happy on this scale of just city. So this is the tyrannical government and soul are the least just, according to this, because instead of having the reason and the spirit, or the rational component and the spirited component ruling the appetites, it's like a flipped pyramid. You flip the pyramid, and the appetites are ruling the spirited element and the rational element. And that is the inverse of his definition of justice, so it's the most unjust, and we show that man is the least happy person there is. So there's his proof. Does that make sense? I don't know, you could still have you don't have to change the whole society. You could have an unjust guy living in a just, mostly just society, according to this, doing exactly what we talked about, which is people think he's just, but really he's unjust, but nobody needs to know. So I don't know how compelling this ultimately is, because it's like there aren't that many like actual tyrants to look at as our example. Okay, but that's his argument anyhow. Glaucon, you have announced it. Socrates, and shall I add that it holds whether or not their characters remain hidden from all human beings and gods. Ah, okay, so that's the real key here. Is this true whether or not people know it's true? And so now he's saying, even if nobody knows you're a tyrant, if you have a tyrannical soul, you're going to be the most miserable, because you just kind of like descend into this addiction and like murder. Glaucon, do at it. Socrates, well then, that is one of our demonstrations. But look at the second one, and see if you think there is anything in it. Whew, okay. We got a second demonstration. Yeah, no thanks. I'm going to stop here. Told you it'd be a short video, and I will live up to that promise. Yeah, so I guess we'll have another demonstration that the tyrant is the worst person in the world in part 2. So all we had here was a description of the tyrannical soul. We had like the son of the Democrat man who, I guess he starts engaging in some lawlessness, and his parents are like, oh, you can have some appetites. And I was saying, they just like leave the liquor cabinet open. And then his friends are like, get him into some like kind of harder stuff. And then he eventually rebels against his parents because he needs money to feed all his drug habit and all this whatever other horrible things he's doing. And then he rebels against them, and they get mad, and then he gets mad, and he goes out on his own and into this like downward spiral of descent and misery, murdering people. And Socrates says that man, it would be the most miserable, but he's even more miserable when he becomes a tyrant of an actual state. So you got the two meeting, and then that is the unhappiest place in the world. And I guess he also uses this slavery analogy to, I don't know what the point of that was, talking about the guy who's like transported into a desert island. I guess it's because, so he's like, oh, well, slave owners might be happy in our society because they're not afraid, but if they had to be afraid, then they'd be the most miserable. And since there's only one tyrant, he has to live his life in fear. All right, that's all I got for you this time. Come back tomorrow. 3 videos after this. We're in the home stretch. Get excited. You've almost finished Plato's Republic. So proud of you. Hit the thumb up button. Hit subscribe. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.